different data protection authorities do things in slightly different ways. We've heard from the CNIL, we've heard from the Dutch authority earlier, we heard from the FTC. And I think the approach of the Information Commissioner's Office here in the UK is sometimes slightly caricatured. I mean, when I was told that I was going to be speaking, I mean, admittedly, it's quoting something I said, so I can't complain, but, you know, I'm in the possibilities business, not in the prohibition business. Reminds me of our good friend Eduardo Usteran introducing me in a similar panel at the IAP event in Washington the year before last. He said, people see Chris Graham as a sort of affable pussycat. I thought that was a bit of a challenge. He was actually saying, you get him wrong if you think he's an affable pussycat, but it was a sort of label that I didn't really appreciate. So I do want to maintain, and I think if you look at the ICO annual report published last week, there's a lot of evidence to say that what the ICO is about is effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, and if I can also borrow a word that Helen Dixon from the Irish Data Protection Authority used this morning, the importance of an engaged approach, engaging with data controllers. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't do very serious enforcement, but because we do. Theodore Roosevelt, in carrying a big stick, he wasn't saying you use the big stick all the time, but you've got to have the big stick there, and people have to know that you've got the big stick, and you will use it. Now, here in the UK, and I'm sure it's true elsewhere, both in Europe and around the world, the phenomenon of nuisance phone calls and nuisance texts has really exploded. Last year, we had 180,000 concerns registered with the ICO about these nuisance phone calls. It's nearly a 12% increase on the year before. And one of the tools we have at our disposal here, the civil monetary penalty of up to £500,000, is the very effective big stick to deal not just with that phenomenon, but with others. If I heard Florence correctly, in France it's €150,000. Under the new regulation, the fine level will be much, much higher. But even when you've got the big stick and you're using the big stick, there are people out there who like to misrepresent the situation. And as always happens, when we launch our annual report, there's one of these trade papers who insists on misunderstanding. I saw a headline saying, privacy watchdog slashes its fines in half. I thought, well, that's news to me. Where do they get that from? And looking through the accounts, I saw that if you look at the income line and compare 2013-14 and 2014-15, you can see that the receipts from fines in 2013-14 was 1.97 million, and the receipts from fines the following year was, the year we were reporting on, 1.129. So a journalist could say, well, you've sort of half the money. But that's not the point. The punishment's got to fit the crime. It depends what the breach is. And so far as privacy and electronic communications regulation is concerned, the legislation that deals with nuisance phone calls and spam texts, we'd actually issued 6 civil monetary penalties in 2014-15, compared with 5 the previous year. So I thought it was a little unfair to say that the privacy watchdog had slashed fines in half. And we were back to the affable pussycat approach. Now, if we were the affable pussycat, we certainly ain't now, because from the 1st of April, following prolonged pressure on the UK government, we've got a change in the law that means we no longer have to prove substantial damage or substantial distress to make those civil monetary penalties stick. Now, it's only good for evidence assembled after the 1st of April, so it isn't going to be fast. But nevertheless, we've got those increased powers. We've got increased powers in the audit area as well. We've now got the power to audit without consent health service providers. I want to have the same power for local authorities, particularly now local authorities are dealing in a joined-up way with health and social care. And I've written to the new Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government saying that's the next thing on my list.